Okay, we're back, we're live. It must be Tuesday. We're having a wonderful time today. We've been brain mapping for a good part of the day. We went out with Joanne Talia. Did I get that right?
Joanne
Tai this morning. And we met a number of students and graduate researchers at the convention center. And we saw a lot of people coming in. We saw posters of every size and shape, thousands of them it seemed like. And we got the idea that this is a big deal in the convention center. It's a big deal for your organization. That's OHBM, okay? And we're gonna talk about that today. It's about brain mapping. So at my left, Linda Chang, Professor Linda Chang, professor at Johnny Bird School of Medicine, but she's in Queens Medical Center. Welcome to the show, Professor.
Thank you.
Nice to have you here. We had a show a long time ago. We made a movie about you a long time ago.
Okay, thank you.
And Dr. Thomas Ernst is out there, right there, I see them. And you guys work together in every way. Came from Brookhaven about 10 years ago.
I am so impressed.
You were recruited by Dr. Cadman, the
Yes.
then dean of the school, who wanted to build a great, a great staff with the best recruits in the country, and you were his, I think maybe his second after Dwayne Googler, wasn't it?
I see. Yes.
Okay, anyway, going on. Then there's Karen Berman in the center. She is with NIH, and that's the National Institutes of Health in Washington, D.C. And she is also the chair
I'm the chair
of
this
OHBM. What's the O and H stand for?
Organization for Human Brain Mapping.
Okay, Organization for Human Brain Mapping, right here. Okay, and finally, at the far side, there's Jack Van Horn, and he is at USC, and he's actually the program chair of this great big meeting we're having right now here.
That's right.
Okay, so welcome to the show, all
Thank
of
you
you.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much
Delightful
for having
to be
us.
here.
It's great to have you here. I mean, we like science, and we do a show called Manoa, Research in Manoa every week, so that's why we call this show Research in Manoa. But I don't think people know anything about brain mapping, and I would like to introduce them to it through you guys today. And we're going to make it OC16 movie out of all of this with the interviews we took this morning, thanks to Joanne. So I guess the first thing is, can we find out who you are in terms of what you're doing in brain mapping and how you got there and why you got there? I mean, what was the reason you got involved? Linda, start.
Okay. My name is Linda Chang. I'm a professor of medicine at the John A. Burns School of Medicine. And I was recruited here, like you said, 10.5 years ago by Dr. Ed Cadman at the time. He wanted to build up neuroscience research at the medical school. So Thomas Ernst and I moved here, and part of what we were doing was that we were already involved in brain mapping. We use brain imaging technique, especially MRI techniques, to study how the brains of people with various neurological conditions are affected. And in particular, I was focusing on studying the effects of substance use. Methamphetamine use and marijuana use are quite prevalent here in Hawaii, especially amongst the younger children. And so we decided to focus our effort on that, and we moved here. Because of our work with substance use, we were fortunate at the time that we got funding from the White House. We got $3 million from the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy to buy an MRI scanner. They're very expensive machines. And then we went to the Queens Medical Center, and they were really generous. They also provided an extra $2 million for us to build our lab, and then we were able to build up the research team to do our research in that area. And since then, we've actually collaborated with many other investigators across the medical school and within Hawaii to do, we have projects involving studying people who come in after they have their heart attack and their brain's in coma, and we want to study how the brain, we want to understand if they're going to wake up or not. And Dr. Matt Conan at the Queens Medical Center, he's one of the neurointensivists, has been doing that research, and we've been collaborating with him on that project. We work with, we use MRI to study children with leukemia who need chemotherapy, and we try to see how the chemotherapy might impact their brain function. And so we could study the brain chemical changes, brain function. We study HIV-infected individuals, and because the virus actually gets into the brain very early, and it can stay in there even if they take the medication. Even if they have undetectable viral load, they can still have inflammation in the brain. And we can study that too. We can measure inflammation. We can measure totally non-invasively using MRI. We don't have to stick a needle in there. So we can study the brain and see how their brains are affected. And then we are doing some intervention right now to try to improve their brain function with computer training techniques. And we can measure the brain function before and after the training and see how the brain becomes more efficient, how it improves over time after the training. And so brain imaging techniques, brain mapping is a way for us to understand how the brain is functioning, both in health and in disease. So and the techniques we have now, you wanted to know why I got into brain imaging, because as a neurologist, I'm trained as a neurologist, and the brain is one of those organs that you can't feel or touch because it's deep in your skull. And even with the heart, you can put a stethoscope and listen to the heartbeat. We can't really hear the brain either. So all these brain imaging techniques that came along with positron emission tomography or MRI, or I'm going to let Karen talk more about, she's the expert on positron emission tomography, but we can learn so much about something that we can't see without the machine, you know, that we can actually look inside the brain. It's like a window into your soul to see how the brain is functioning, and by understanding how the brain is affected, we can try to come up with ways to improve the disorder. You know, like if we know it's missing this chemical, or if we know certain disease affects the brain in a certain way, we try to come up with ways to improve the condition. So it ultimately is to try to improve health.
Why do I feel that you're only starting?
Yes, that's a really good question, because the brain is the most complex organ in the body. It's more complex than any computers we have right now available. So because it's so complicated that I've been doing this for a long time, like 20 years or whatever, and yet it seems like the more you learn about the brain, the more you realize what you don't know about the brain, kind of like that, yeah.
Yeah. Just strikes me that, you know, Bill Gates ought to be watching you because, or a computer guy ought to be watching you, because if you can figure out the way the brain actually thinks and stores information, then they could copy that in some left-handed way.
Yeah.
Maybe that's coming down the pike too.
Yeah.
Why does a computer, you know, it could use chemicals. It does use electric impulses. Isn't it possible to design a computer that is not only functionally, but structurally like a brain?
I think there are people that try to do something like that. It's called artificial intelligence, right? There are people that try to replicate that, but it's so complex. I don't think we know enough to really replicate.
Well, we'll see if we can learn some more here in this
Yeah,
show.
and that's why this is so important for us to have something like the OHBM, which for everyone to share their knowledge and come together to learn from each other to advance the science.
Fabulous
Yeah.
that you're here. Fabulous that you're here in Hawaii.
Yes.
Thank you. We're thrilled to be here.
Yeah. So you're a doctor, Karen.
Yes.
And you're a doctor in MD research as opposed to a PhD researcher. You're
Well,
a PhD.
I'm MD.
She's
Oh,
an
MD
I'm
also.
a neurologist.
I should be able to tell the difference, you know, something in the eyes.
Well, the reason you can't is because we all do very similar work, and we are motivated by a lot of the same desires to help people.
How did you get into brain research?
So, as you mentioned, I'm a physician, and I was a resident in psychiatry in the late 70s, and I was very motivated by my lack of ability to help some of my patients. And at the same time, the very first CAT scan images of the brain in patients with, for example, schizophrenia were coming online, and we were able to see changes in the brain. And this changed not only my life in the way I thought about my patients, but the lives of patients. It reduced the stigma of having a mental disorder, to realize that this is really based in the brain. And it became my desire to learn how to help more by doing research. And I went to the National Institutes of Health to try to carry that out. And
What
I've
do you
been
do
there
there?
for 34 years.
34 years at National Institutes? My God, you
Yes.
must be healthy.
I don't know about that. Persistent, if nothing else.
You know, it strikes me from what you said, you've seen both sides of, or at least the evolution of this. One, you know, psychiatry, the old-fashioned, even Freudian sense, looking at the brain and thinking as a, from the vantage of psychology. It's not necessarily structural or chemical or electrical impulses or anything like that. And now, 34 years later, you're looking at it in a completely different way. You're looking at it as, among other things, as a structural organ with chemicals and electrical impulses, and, you know, it's different, isn't it?
And the capacity to change, which is
Yeah,
something
yes.
that's very new. When I was a medical student and a resident, the dogma was that the brain is fixed, that there are no new neurons, and that it can't be changed in any way. We now know that our experiences, in addition to our genetic makeup, make us who and what we are. And it's brain imaging that has really allowed us to uncover that. As Linda was mentioning, our brains are completely unique. Not only can we not see them or touch them, there's no animal model for a heart, as you were mentioning. You can actually study an animal's heart, and you can get pretty close to what's going on in the human heart. Not so with the brain.
Okay, now the Organization of Human Brain Mapping, OHBM.
Very good.
Yeah, all day I had to learn it. Okay, you're the chair.
It's my privilege this year to be the chair, yes.
That's fabulous.
Yes.
And so what does it involve? Can you tell us about the organization, its depth and its scope and its breadth?
Well, we are having our 21st annual meeting here in Hawaii this year, and that means that it's our 20th anniversary. And the beginning, which I was, again, privileged to be at, our first meeting 20 years ago brought together people throughout the world when it became clear how powerful these brain imaging techniques are and how much we could work together to really forward our understanding of the human brain. And that was the beginning of it. It's evolved over the years. It's been really, truly an honor to see how brain imaging has evolved and how our knowledge of the brain has grown with it. So it's a highly international organization with members from throughout the world, and we come together once a year to share our experiences and our research and to learn from each other.
You know, that's kind of extraordinary. I mean, in 20 years,
It is extraordinary.
20 years, this science has become internationalized, hugely interesting to every country that has any medical research at all. It's global, and
Yes.
it's happened within our lifetimes.
Yes.
You know, you can't find too many things in medical science that are quite like that. Why is it like that? Why has every country on the planet, you know, gone so wholeheartedly into this research? Why?
There are a few reasons, I think. One is that our technology has grown and has been shared throughout the world. And I remember way back when it was computers that were the rate limiting factor in what we could do. And that's just become so much more widespread. The other, I think, is the promise of these techniques and the work we do to help people and to help us understand who and what we are. And that's universal. That's something that's shared with every colleague that is here at this meeting, almost 3,000 of us, and more throughout the world.
Everybody wants to know about the brain.
Yes.
Jack, we're going to take a short break.
Okay.
And when we come back, we're going to get you to explain everything about the conference going on right now.
Delighted to do it.
Okay. We'll be right back. 1 minute, you'll see.
Hi, I'm Ethan Allen. I host Likeable Science on ThinkTech Hawaii, and I do this because I care about science literacy in Hawaii. I want to spread the understanding that science is a vital and interesting part of everyone's life. I want to make sure the broadest possible spectrum of people understand the beauty and the value of science and realize that science plays out each and every day of their lives. I want you to understand that science is fun. So we bring onto this show each week guests who are scientists, from astronomers to zoologists, and we talk about what they do and how they do it. But most importantly, we talk about why you should care about their work, why you should see that their work has value and impact on your life. So I hope you'll join us Fridays, 1 p.m. here on ThinkTech Hawaii. You can watch us via live stream. You can watch us recorded on Olelo, and you can see us each week.
How many seconds?
So join us.
Okay, we're back, we're live. We're here in Research in Manoa. We're talking about brain mapping in Hawaii, and specifically the OHBM, which is the Organization for Human Brain Mapping, which is meeting right now here today. And Jack Van Horn is you're the chair of the meeting.
Program chair.
Program chair of the meeting that's happening right now at the Convention Center.
That's right.
Where 3,000 people are attending. 1,500 members are in residence or attending, and virtually thousands of posters in respect of research projects that are going on around the world. Right here in Honolulu. Makes you feel good, doesn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
we're very honored to have the
Absolutely.
meeting here.
So delighted that we could bring the world's best brain mappers here to Honolulu and feature some of the best science just down the street here.
Yes.
Yeah. It's an interesting comparison is that in the month of, I want to say March or early April, the Hawaii Science Fair was conducted in the same space that you are occupying in the Convention Center. And 700 kids apply, and they make posters and exhibits of their science projects. And when I walked in this morning, I thought maybe I was in the science fair again. It looked just like the science fair with all these virtually thousands of posters.
Oh, yeah.
So can you talk about what's on the schedule? What's on the deck for the conference this week?
So let me give you a little rundown about how it's kind of organized. So we have a number of different sessions. We have educational sessions, which is a very important aspect of this particular meeting, is basically taking this brain mapping, taking the history that Karen and Linda kind of articulated, illustrating that. What do we know about the brain? How does it work? How does it function? What goes wrong with the brain in disease or when the brain is injured? So how do we communicate that to students and fellows and young medical students? We also feature the current cutting edge of brain research, all the newest stuff. We have a number of workshops and symposia, keynote speakers, and it was just the other evening we had our kind of signature lecture called the Talarak Lecture. We had a wonderful lecture by a researcher from Yale University named Amy Arnston. And it was just a fantastic illustration of connectivity in the brain, how the brain talks to itself, how it communicates information around. It was very interesting. And just, now we have day after day of just even more exciting, top of the line research from places all over the world, right here in Hawaii. It's fantastic.
Just a footnote question. How does it communicate with itself?
Oh, that's a very, you have to go to the conference.
Profound question.
There's a number of different ways that it does that through electrical impulses that convey action potentials from one part of the brain to the other. These are usually chemically signaled as well, and the neurons that are involved change their shapes. They make new connections as where learning happens. And then, unfortunately, in some diseases, some of that dies away, and you can result in Alzheimer's disease or other degenerative disorders. We're still trying to understand things, as Karen kind of commented on, schizophrenia or other mental illnesses. And I do a lot of work in traumatic brain injury. So what happens when the brain gets
an
injured?
MD researcher or a PhD?
No, I'm a
researcher?
PhD researcher.
Well, okay, that's fair. We have a democratic approach to this.
There we go. That's right. Which is kind of interesting because when I was doing my PhD work, the big thing was kind of cognitive science. And so people used to come up with all sorts of explanations about how the brain worked without ever actually looking at it. And I kind of became a little frustrated with that because they would usually involve some box arrow models on a whiteboard or something, and if they didn't like the way it looked, they would just erase an arrow. And I used to kind of ask them, how can you make these models of the brain without actually looking at it? And they would get very indignant and say, well, we can make models of the brain without the messy stuff between your ears. And I realized that just wasn't going to be enough for me. And shortly thereafter, actually, Dr. Berman went to work in her laboratory and began doing what has become 20 years worth of brain mapping research. And it's been a very interesting
worked with
run.
Dr. Berman all these years?
Yes.
Well, she
worked
gave me
together
my
for many
start,
years.
as it turns out.
You guys are an old family in what
Yes.
That's
science.
right.
Yes.
And one of the things which is very interesting, which people may not fully appreciate, is that we gather a lot of data, a very large amount of data. And I always like to tell my students the story of when I was a newly minted postdoctoral fellow in Dr. Berman's lab. She had asked me to buy the computer hard disk that we would use to store all of our brain data. And I can't remember how much the budget was, but I went out and I went shopping and found the
Wasn't very
biggest
much.
hard disk I could find. And at the time I thought 4 gigabytes was infinity and that we would never fill that up.
You're dating yourself, Jack.
I know.
And I was awed by his expertise in being able to come up with this.
And people would come by the lab to gaze upon our 4 gigabyte hard drive. And now, I could eat
Your
that for
thumb
breakfast. It's nothing.
Really?
And we collect now, terabytes, petabytes worth of data are being archived and available for people to mine and to analyze and explore from these brain imaging experiments.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. We covered this in the discussion with Joanne this morning. You let that go out into the public. If I called you and say, Jack, I need your data, I want your data, I want
Yes.
to experiment,
Yeah.
you'll give it to me.
So we're a very collaborative community, which is wonderful. There are several areas of science where they're very protective of their data. And brain mappers are very interested in making sure that the widest possible set of eyes can look at these data, can analyze them, can develop new methodologies, look at things in a different way that somebody else might not have appreciated, to just get a new perspective on that data. And that's been very exciting. There's this whole movement in big data and how we get that data and amass it so that people can mine it and discover new things. That's been very interesting to be a part of and watch happen in the brain mapping community.
It's a great time to be alive.
I think it's a very good time to be a brain mapper. There's a lot of data, there's a lot of questions, and there's work for everybody.
I can see it as a t-shirt, Jack. It's a good time to be a brain mapper.
We'll get right on that.
Some of the public sharing data is actually mandated by the NIH, because a lot of our research, the best research is usually funded by the NIH, and because it's public dollars funding the research, we have an obligation to share the data with the public also.
Can we talk about money?
Yes,
You know,
we can.
usually I lower my voice, I can talk about money. So how well funded is brain mapping in this country, in the world?
Well, I think that a big part of the research portfolio, at least in the United States and in other parts of the world as well, does bring together things like brain mapping, now genetics that we're very interested in. But in general, my concern, which I'll share with you in the United States, is that funding for science has decreased.
In general.
In general. And as you said, this is one of the most promising and exciting times to be alive and to be working in the field that we're in. So I think this is a terrible shame. We really need to capitalize on the progress that we've made. And we really can help people. I'm firmly committed to that.
Knock wood, I hope there's more money coming soon. You know, in a sense, it's kind of a function of the economic health of the country.
Yes,
Yeah.
But it's also a function of priorities, political priorities.
that's exactly correct,
And,
in my opinion, yeah.
Yeah.
The health of the nation and the mental and neurological health of the nation should be a priority.
Right.
Isn't that true? Because I think we can all agree that a nation that is mentally healthy is a more productive nation. It's that simple.
Definitely.
Absolutely. If we're trying to,
Yeah.
compare ourselves with other countries and,
Yeah.
and just be competitive and be successful and
Yeah.
innovative, taking care of our brains is a good idea.
Also, the population as a whole is aging, and many of the brain diseases actually manifest themselves in the aging brain. Like you think about Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, even ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and many of the other conditions actually manifest only in the aging brain.
That's going to be more and more the case going forward.
We're going to have more and more of those cases, so we need to solve that problem before it breaks the Medicare bank.
It's true.
It's breaking its bank.
It's just another reason to come to the conclusion this is the right time. I mean, the demographic is extraordinary. You see it everywhere. Certainly see it in Hawaii. And people are healthy otherwise. Medical science has kept them together pretty well, but they lose their ability to think, and it's tragic.
Yes.
Because they were great thinkers once, they had
Right.
great careers and lives, but now it's gone and they're hulks. And we have to fix that somehow. We really should attend to
Hawaii
that.
actually has the oldest
Yes.
age for the population because it's such a wonderful place to live and we live longer. But, we have to worry about some of the diseases that affect the aging brain.
That's why a lot of this research has to be done here.
We need more researchers to come here,
That's right.
definitely.
So where is this research being done in general? Where are the centers of it?
I would say that this research, and I think this meeting exemplifies this, is all over the world, even in underdeveloped countries who are beginning to come online. And the Organization for Human Brain Mapping has made a point of trying to bring some of the scientists from these countries to our meeting to interact with all of us. And the more minds we can put together on these problems that Linda so well articulated, the better we'll do. So it's really worldwide. And as Jack said, we do share our data, we share our ideas and our expertise, I think particularly well in this field. It's all over.
And these issues, you think about it, and more issues come to mind. Your point about aging, absolutely. But, for example, take all those Marines, Army troopers that come back with PTSD, what is it?
PTSD. And traumatic brain
yes,
injury.
And traumatic brain
They
injury.
get the blast injuries.
There's got to be some truths that you can find, some scientific lessons that you can learn from watching them.
Absolutely. That and sports concussion, so
Yes.
youth
Yeah.
sports, for example.
Yes.
And it's not just like the heavy impact contact sports like football. It's also in women's volleyball. It's also in like competitive diving. Repetitive head injuries and head impacts can take a long-term toll, and we don't know yet, but there's some suspicion that those diseases that Linda mentioned that happen in the aging brain may have gotten their start when you were younger and you were
Right.
playing a sport where you had repetitive
Right.
head injuries.
It can make them more vulnerable to those
That's right.
diseases later in life.
And life in general.
I would say.
Life in general.
Right.
For example, I like Diet Coke. I know Diet Coke is not good for me. I know this. And none of you will disagree, I think. But query, is there something in Diet Coke that is killing my brain cells faster than a glass of wine would kill my brain cells? We don't know yet,
We don't know.
but we may find out. We may find out that life itself is doing something.
The big question is, your brain knows that it's not good for you, but you're doing it anyway.
Yeah.
Why are you making that decision?
That's because
What's going on in your brain?
I'm a mammal. And you can't get away from that. And that's the problem, it'd be great to achieve a completely rational human being, but.
That would be the computer intelligence.
That's right.
So, there are other things too. We mentioned, just as we were getting together on this, the maze test example that you spoke of. Can we talk about that?
Oh, certainly. So we were discussing before we went on the air that the field of brain mapping has come an enormous way in the last 20 years. It's been really remarkable. We've seen many examples of that in the past couple days already. We were talking about this maze task, which Dr. Berman and I had conducted back in the 1990s, and it was pretty simple. It was using positron emission tomography, and over a period of time, we would collect an image, which was over several minutes long, and we had people do this maze learning task where the initial time that they were doing it, they were completely naive to how to solve the maze. And then after that scan, we let them practice so they become expert at it, and then we had them do it again. And of course, when they did it again, they were much better. They knew how to solve the maze. They didn't have to work as hard mentally to be able to solve it. And when we looked at the brain images from the naive condition to the more experienced condition, they were completely different. And as Karen kind of was indicating, it used to be thought that the brain was kind of just fixed and it didn't change much over time. And we were amazed to see that the pattern of brain activity was completely different between the two, even though they're doing exactly the same task.
How long were they practicing?
We would have them do it for about 5 minutes in between.
Only 5 minutes?
Yes. So just in 5 minutes, they could get up to...
Your brain totally changed after 5 minutes.
And so it was very interesting to show how
That's
plastic, how
extraordinary.
changeable and malleable the brain is.
Yeah.
And this was 20 years ago, and now we do these kinds of things using fMRI, which allows us to get more data.
We do this routinely now. We can see it immediately. Within 1 minute, your brain is different.
Wow.
Yes?
And then we were going to talk about epigenetics. We're going to take a break before we do that. It's
Okay.
sort of a big bite question. We'll be right back. We're going to talk about epigenetics, and you'll learn what that means too.
Aloha, my name is Miley Scarpino, and I'm the host of the Empower Hour. If you're interested in health, nutrition, fitness, here on the island of Oahu, want to learn more about places to train at or different trainers available, then watch my show on Fridays at 3. We have a great time, and I hope that you'll come join us. Much aloha. Now go get swole.
Aloha, my name is Paul Jackson, better known as PJ, and my local interest is in sports. I have my own sports radio show at KWAI AM 1080 that you can stream live. I also have my own website, pjsportsradio.com. We have live guests in studio, and we talk about discussions and topics that everyone wants to know locally here on the islands. We cover everything from surfing to basketball to whatever's going on locally, sports-wise. We try to do our best and cover the topics in depth as much as we can. Once again, thank you for joining PJ here on Hawaii Sports Update. Mahalo.
Okay, we're back. We're live. We're really getting interested now. So epigenetics. Karen, would you define that, please?
So epigenetics are changes in the genome which we all inherit from our mothers and fathers, but these changes can occur as a function of experience and our environment, and they can even be passed on to our own offspring. So we're learning a lot about genetics and how genes work through the brain to make us who and what we are, but also how not only the genome, but our brains are plastic and can change.
Yeah. So they can, the actual genes in our brains and other parts of our body can change during life. We can have evolution, Mendelian evolution, if you like. Well, some kind of evolution.
Some kind of evolution.
You know what's interesting about this? So Darwinian evolution totally argued against any sort of being able to carry these things on through behavior or experience.
Yeah.
There was a gentleman in France at about the same time named Lamarck, and Lamarckian evolution was that your experiences could get inherited and encoded and passed down from generation to generation. People, for whatever reason, seem to like Darwinian evolution better. Mr. Lamarck was kind of disparaged for a long time until more recently, where we've realized that these things can actually happen, and they work kind of in parallel. It's a very interesting story of science.
Yeah. Are you finding that in your research on some of these diseases?
We're beginning to collect samples to answer those questions, but other researchers have done that with animal models even, not just to really prove it, right? So, for example, there was a recent article in Time magazine a couple weeks ago about marijuana, the pot science. I don't know if you saw
Oh, we have to
that
talk
one.
about that. That's what I couldn't.
Because Dr. Jasmine Hurd at Mount Sinai Medical Center, they had animals that were, trained to become addicted to heroin or cocaine. And they showed that if their offsprings, even though the offspring didn't use cocaine or whatever, they become more susceptible to become addicted to drugs. So once somebody changed their gene expression, the offspring will inherit the gene that will make them more vulnerable to whatever the disease is. So it's not, that's just one example.
So amazing.
Yeah.
You know, all these years, I mean, I'm just a person, I'm not a doctor. All these years I thought well, it's all about, mutation over time, and Mendelian or Darwinian, what have you. And now we find that we can actually change the line, change the characteristics of the organism.
And it gets
in one
passed on
generation.
to
And it gets
more
passed
than
on.
one generation even.
This is very scary stuff.
Yes.
But this could happen in the brain too.
Yeah.
It's all plastic.
Yeah,
Yes.
we do that actually. We haven't actually looked into the actual epigenetic changes, but we've been studying children who are born from mothers that use drugs during pregnancy, because we want to study how that affect their brain development, because it could change that. And so a lot of the research is now focusing on brain development in children in the very young, because I think it's a period when the brain is growing and changing a lot, and if the child is exposed to drugs during pregnancy, let's say if the mother's smoking cigarettes or drinking alcohol, it can change the brain. And so, and as they develop, the development can be changed. And some of that can catch up and some can't, so we're trying to understand all that. And you want to talk a little bit more about the...
Well, I think that an important area in our field is understanding the developing brain.
Mm-hmm.
Just as Dr. Chang was mentioning, that we now understand more about aging and what an important tool this will be in understanding how our brains age. We're also beginning to understand what happens from childhood and even infancy. At our meeting yesterday, we had sessions about studying preterm infants, for example, and the brains in utero as they're actually in the uterus growing. And this is extremely important because we do know that a number of neuropsychiatric disorders emerge during childhood, during puberty. Schizophrenia, which is something that I study in my work, emerges after puberty. We think that there are interactions between hormones and genes that affect the brains. But the more we learn about what makes us who and what we are through development, the more we'll be able to help. Our techniques that we are using and that are featured at this meeting are non-invasive, and that's been a very important part of enabling this kind of research. They are easy. Children, babies can even be studied with no harm. And this has enabled us to learn an awful lot about how the brain develops.
I was going to ask you if animals are ever involved, or if we know anything much about the brains in animals. It seems like to me, we don't need, am I right? We don't need to study animals because we have these non-invasive techniques to study humans. Go to the human brain. That's why it's called the Organization of Human Brain Matter.
Well,
Well,
yes and no.
Yes and no, good,
Because
okay.
you heard Dr. Berman mention earlier that we can now learn so much about the human, and there's really no perfect animal model and no perfect computer model that can model the human brain, and yet we share a lot of similarities genetically with a rat. Like the genome of the
that's
rat and his,
comforting,
and his genome of a human,
think I know some
it's
of
like
them. They're on
90-some
Bishop Street.
percent similarity. So because of that, a lot of the rodent experiments actually can allow us to extend what we cannot see or do from the brain imaging technique. There's still limitations. It's evolving and improving all the time, but there's still limitations. Like, for example, if you want to, with an animal, we can, go in and look at the, different cells, and you can stimulate individual cells more specifically. They do that they do some of that in human brains too. Like if somebody was having brain surgery, you can go in and stimulate the brain and study, but you can only keep the brain open for so long. And so it extends what we cannot do in.
But the future may be, we were talking about this during the break, the future may be, what was the term you used for it? It's the idea of conducting energy through the air and receiving it at the other side. So, I can send a message without actually making any holes, right? Like I can charge my phone. So can you do changes to the brain? I know it doesn't happen yet, but do you think we'll be able to do changes to the brain, fix things that are wrong in the brain by some kind of energy that comes from the outside?
Yes, it's actually a rapidly evolving field right now with transcranial magnetic stimulation, where we can stimulate the brain to improve symptoms of depression. We can stimulate the brain to improve cognition. So there's experiments where people show that after certain types of stimulation, they can improve their memory. So it can, but it's evolving. It's still sort of an early stage with those techniques. But we just actually had a 2-day conference at the Queen's Medical Center right before the OHBM with about 150 people attending, and again from all over the world gathered together to share the knowledge they have regarding this brain stimulation techniques.
I love when that happens.
Yeah.
But I want to be involved somehow. You guys can always come down. So some of the other things we talked about off the record, I mean, before we got started, was the ability of humankind to communicate brain to brain. And to my surprise, you mentioned there was a discussion of this at the conference. So wow, so that's really out of science fiction, isn't it? I mean, can you do that, and how?
We share very similar brains. Each one of us is different, but overall, like our genes, we are very similar. We do share experiences, we share perceptions. So one of the talks at this conference elicited how we can communicate by provoking similar brain patterns in people that we're speaking to or sharing experiences with. So this is, again, a very emerging field. It's something that is extremely interesting, and I think it's one of the big questions.
So if I try real hard, I can read your mind?
I don't know, not yet, but maybe with an fMRI scanner you might be able to, right?
Yeah.
Well, I do want to talk about the equipment, because I think the equipment is very
Yes.
important. And I remember seeing your facility in 2 levels down in Queens Hospital 10 years ago. I was really impressed. But, you know, I'm sure it's come a long way since then. Can you talk about the kinds of scan? Let's see, there was MRI, PET scan, fMRI, and EEG you mentioned to me. What do we got going here?
Sure. So if you've ever had an MRI scan because you had an injury or something, we use that same sort of technology, but we put your brain in there. There's some mad physics that goes on, and from that process, we're able to get beautiful images of brain structure.
In color.
Absolutely. But we can also get images that are over time of blood flow related signal change. And we can also do some other configurations to look at magnetic resonance spectroscopy and diffusion tensor imaging, or patterns of diffusion, which we can use to infer white matter fiber pathways in the brain. Combining all that is very powerful. We need to use some pretty big computers for that. Likewise with positron emission tomography, which Karen kind of talked about, that's using radioactive isotopes to look for regional cerebral blood flow, looking for neurochemical signatures in the brain. We can use that. There's electroencephalography, or EEG, where it's magnetic counterpart, magnetoencephalography. There's a number of these techniques that are emerging or getting better all the time at being advanced, and we collect tons of data, and we use some pretty big computers to be able to analyze it all.
Yeah.
So Xiaoming Wei talked this morning about multimodal.
Yes.
And I guess that means you can use a bunch of these things.
Yeah, we put them all together.
And
We may
then-
study a single person with all of these modalities. So magnetoencephalography and electroencephalography give us millisecond activity in the brain. fMRI is very well localized. We know exactly where in the brain things are happening, but it takes seconds to resolve such an image. And seconds are an eternity in terms of how we think.
Yeah.
So combining those 2 methods, for example, is something that's very powerful and that is very well represented at this meeting. And we're all learning new ways to combine all of this information and the information from positron emission tomography, how much dopamine is in our brain and how does that affect brain activity, for example, putting it all together.
Putting all these different pieces of data
Yes.
together,
Yes.
and then coming out with some conclusions about
Right.
what it all means.
And because of the advances in computer, all these techniques are enabling us to acquire the data much higher, higher speed. Like, for example, you can scan the whole brain for like a minute and get thousands of images. And by putting all that together, you can get much more information, through over time, across time and space. And, but it's not just, so it's not just the hardware, it's also the software.
Yeah.
And the physicists that we have, for example, working in our lab here in Hawaii, they design new MRI sequences for allow us to, you know, be able to get higher resolution image and better data. And especially, you know, one of the techniques that Thomas Ernst works on is this motion tracking technique, like especially for imaging children, they tend to move a lot, and or even somebody who has dementia or is sick or uncomfortable, they can't hold still during the scan. That can cause a lot of problem for imaging. Okay. So we have ways of tracking the motion and changing the scan plane.
Compensated for it.
When we change the scan plane as somebody's moving, it's like one of those missile thing. You lock in on them and you move with them, and that way we get really good data.
So what's on your wish list, Linda? You know, if for example, if you got a call next week and Karen said, look, I was digging and I found $50 million for you. And I just want to send you a check for that. What would you go out and buy in order to advance your research?
Well,
surprise question.
Yes, that is a surprise question. But I would definitely want to bring some of the best researchers to join our team to work with us, because I think that's one of our deficits here in Hawaii. We don't have as many outstanding researchers. We get to see them at the meetings, but we don't have as many of them here in Hawaii.
Okay, well, maybe you ought to think about having more conferences here, you know.
I think we should.
Great
As you
idea.
grow,
We
you
should.
should do that.
I love that idea.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's, my last question goes around of time, actually, is where is this all going? I mean, in your vision, you're all committed and passionate and totally lifetime devoted to it. Where is it all going? What do you see in your mind's eye? Ooh, your mind's eye, did you hear me say that? In your mind's eye, where do you see this area of science going in the next, say, generation?
That's a good question. I guess my dream is that we will be able to help patients with serious neuropsychiatric and neurological disorders for whom we don't have great treatments at the moment, that the work that we do will bring us closer to that, and we'll have good treatments and understand how the brain works. One of the great things about this meeting that we're all at is that it brings together the physicists, the physicians, the cognitive scientists, the psychologists, and we all bring something to the table in trying to achieve that goal.
So the meeting is not just about brain mappers, it's about all the disciplines that feed into it.
That's absolutely
Brain
right.
imaging is
Collaborate with
definitely
it is
the
nexus.
most interdisciplinary field that
right.
I know. It
Interesting.
requires so many different kinds of expertise in order to solve this very complex,
Yeah, fabulous.
very, very
How can you
complex
sleep
problem.
at night?
It's a wonder.
Yeah.
Our brains are full.
So Jack, I want to let you close, okay? That camera over there, that's number one. Let's see, I think we'll pick that one.
Okay.
Why don't you look into that camera and tell the people what, here in Hawaii, what you'd like them to know about brain mapping, about the Organization of Human Brain Mapping, and about your conference.
So the Organization for Human Brain Mapping, that we're holding our 21st annual meeting here in Honolulu, Hawaii, is the world's premier organization for understanding the organization, the structure, the function, and the connectivity of the human brain using neuroimaging techniques. It's a multidisciplinary activity involving thousands of scientists. We're presenting multiple talks, workshops, seminars, educational forums, and posters, presenting some of the world's best brain research using these methodologies. It's very exciting. The world has come to Honolulu. We have investigators from Iran, from Canada, from Latin America. We even have some investigators from Cuba. It's very exciting. It's very fun. And we're just learning tons. And we hope that we'll share this with everybody around the world, as well as in Honolulu.
Thank you all. It's been great to talk to you. Thank you, Joanne Tai. Thank you, Thomas Ernst. Great to have you here in the studio.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yes.
Aloha. Again soon.
Yes.